All right, thank you everyone for coming out Wednesday, November 13th for the budget committee meeting, monthly budget meeting. Please remind me, do I have to call to order to start?
Call to
Okay.
order and
Can I get a roll call to call to order the meeting tonight?
you just need to say.
Okay,
we're
I
in
did that
order.
already.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Never.
Call to order. All right. Would somebody like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Any volunteers? All right, great.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you.
Jesus.
All right.
Whoa.
So first up tonight, we have approval of the public meeting minutes from the last meeting on October 13th. Are there any edits or changes that need to be made to the minutes? No? Okay, then can I get someone to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
Motion made. Second.
Seconded, all right. And we don't have any Zoom participants, so I think we can just take a voice vote, right, Neil? Okay. All in favor of approving the meeting minutes?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
One abstention
One abstention, thank you.
was not here.
Perfect, okay. That's Rich
Houston.
abstained. Okay, so approved, thank you. And we have any further discussion on indices? I don't think that there is follow-up on this item from me tonight. And I did not hear from anyone that had anything specific to add. Unless anyone feels it needs to be further discussed. Or, okay, then in that case, we will take that off the agenda next time, Neil. But we will, I think I had an action item to make the Excel sheet available once updated. I have not updated it yet, so that's on me. But I'll make sure that's done before the next meeting. Okay, Ken, do you want to kick us off with the town update?
Sure.
All right.
You would have all received a two-page summary, one page of revenue, one of expenses for the first 10 months of the town's year or fiscal year. Looking at the revenue side of it, other than timing in a number of instances, for instance, room and meals tax distribution from the state comes the end of the year. Other than things like that, it looks very good and pretty much in line with anticipation. I'll point out that motor vehicle permit fees is running about 3% higher than budgeted, which is good because that would mean maybe 40,000 at the end of the year going into the fund balance. The water pollution grants is high, that's due to solar array grant that was for the wastewater treatment plant at Lagoons. And the other miscellaneous revenues will go up. It looks low now, but the TIF district payment for half of the economic development director's position is not yet included. So that's just a quick summary on the revenue side, if anybody has any questions. Twice, okay. Turning on to the expense side, again, we're looking good, a little bit under budget. And I'll just point out that election registration and vital statistics is will be going up considerably because the November election has not been included there yet. Cemeteries looks like it's high, but they'll have to be making a reimbursement out of their reserve accounts to come up to what the budgeted amount was. Highways and streets, it was, catching up there was $294,000 of expense in October, and there'll be additional expenses in the following month or two. On welfare administration, Neil is delighted that we now have that position filled, and it seems like a very good employee there. I think those are the highlights. Again, there are some timing issues. For instance, debt service, principal and interest are at 100% for the year. They're already covered. So are there any questions on the expense side? If not, I'll move to just let everybody know where at this point in time the select board stands with regards to our budget for 2025. We received the department heads proposals, and if I just look at the operating budget, it's really good. Our starting point, including sewer expenses, is just under 3.5%. On the negative side, warrant articles, this capital reserve funds requests are up very significantly, and they are primarily, again, the big driver is roads. We have, at this point, the select board has just had presentations from the smaller departments, and I would have to say I have not seen that there were many changes called for there. I think the department heads really listened to the direction from Neil and the select board and this committee to try to keep costs as low as possible there. The overall increase at this point, driven by the warrant article, the CRF, was 17.81% increase in the tax rate. Then I'll quickly add that there's no fund balance that has been used to reduce this yet, and that's not an issue the select board has talked about yet. And we have not looked at the operating revenue projections, which I expect will be going up some. So on the plus side, we're starting at 17.8%. Other years would be starting at 30%. So in that sense, we're doing better than
What was your budget only?
including sewer, 3.48%. In the presentation booklet we received, I believe consistent with the request from the budget committee last year, each department has provided a write-up of their major services, responsibilities, objectives, and service indicators, which I think is a definite benefit. And on a quick overall basis, I don't know, Neil, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
Not yet.
And that's, I'll emphasize that's at this point in time, and next Monday, we'll have police, fire, ambulance, and roads department heads coming in. And the following Monday, we'll have, I believe, transfer station, including the Webster Select Board, and probably at that time, we'll also be looking at the CRF and maybe the fund balance. So certainly the next couple of Mondays, if you can come or zoom in.
And can you remind us what CRF stands for?
And we're advertising for a position at the transfer station,
Yes,
and that is,
it's what,
It's a part-time position, 30-hour-a-week position.
did we have somebody leave or?
We did.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if I missed this, but is in the $4 million that we're looking at to close the landfill part, is that got anything to do yet with the lagoon at the
Could you
highway?
pull your microphone because the recording doesn't pick it up if you don't use your microphone.
Don, I believe that there's some interest expense relating to the bridge loans for that in the CRF for this year. But there's no other expenses, I believe, related to that hitting in 2025. They'll basically hit the following year if it goes through.
I assume you're still waiting for information on what the closure cost or the digging out the lagoon.
The lagoon itself at the transfer station or
No, at the highway garage.
that number, we're still waiting
Okay.
for the engineers to finalize.
That was what my question was, sorry.
Oh, okay. And strike my answer.
Ken, you just mentioned, sorry, you have a draft proposal for what the lagoon cleanup warrant article would be? I mean, it's a bond, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's the scope, what's the scope of that bond?
It's 4.5 million, basically.
4.1.
And the cost would be shared with Webster 75-25.
How long would that project take? Sorry, how long would the project take?
I'm looking to Neil because we haven't gotten into this enough.
So construction would start in 2025 and end in 2026. We did receive a DES grant, which allows us to borrow from the Clean Water Revolving Fund. So of that 10%, first during construction, the loan is at 1%. And then once construction is complete, it goes to a low interest loan. And 10% of what is borrowed will be forgiven. That was a grant received. So
is the impact to the tax rate, including that, like, is that, would that be, how long, what is the life of the loan?
right now we're carrying it as a 20-year loan.
Okay.
In the CRF, at this point in time, let's call it for estimation purposes. For 2025, what I call the bridge loan relating to this, the Hopkinton share would be roughly $15,000. But then in 2026, it would jump up to around 30, and then the real impact hits the year after that, and it's 220,000 more or less. Hopkinton impact.
That would be the full impact.
Yeah, 2026.
Then it would be minus Webster share beyond that.
Yeah.
Because it would be a Hopkinton loan and then we would be reimbursed.
This shows the total cost with 2027 is 291,000, and then 72 would be Webster share of that.
At least for me, when the town comes to present the budget next month, it would be helpful to get kind of like a full breakdown of the impact of just that on the tax rate versus the operating budget. Like the tax rate impact of that on its own next year in 2026, and then whatever the full impact hits. Do you know what I'm saying?
We generally provide a
Me too.
20-year impact per
Right.
year, even with an estimate of what this would cost now I guess we'll use a $500,000 house, which seems to be the average. So that would all be part of that presentation.
And Ken, were you suggesting there's also a road bond being contemplated? I apologize if I didn't quite catch it when you're saying that.
Not that I'm aware of at this
Okay.
point in time.
That's the
But
only
there would
bond?
be, that bond, I think there would be, a very small bond relating to the sewer cammering. And whether there's a separate bond for the, wastewater treatment, lagoon cleanup.
Thank you.
What I had mentioned roads in the CRF, that would be increasing the reserve in the CRF relating to roads itself.
Anyone else? Hey, Charlie.
Fine.
Let's go.
Sorry.
Any other comments or questions for Ken? All right. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
John, do you want to cover the Kentucky Village precinct?
Yes. You all have the document in your computers, I believe. We're still in a very fluid position at the, well, it's bad term, I guess. We're still in a lot of things going on. I'm just going to run down through sort of the highlights, not specifically telling you where they are in this, but we basically have a shortfall in the water billing this year of about 86,000, and that's because the second bill got a little bit messed up when it was sent out. The routine maintenance, however, is under by 17,000. The water treatment at the Bound Tree plant is, for the subcontractors, it's over 11,000 at this point. The repairs and maintenance is over by 81,000 at this point, and that's probably going to increase. The grant income is 76,000, and we took 200,000 from our reserve account. So all those things balance out to about a $42,000 at this moment for a positive position. Any questions on that as you try to comprehend that part of it? We did have a rate study presentation today, which Neil attended, and one of the precinct commissioners and myself. And that was very, very informative. There's an extensive spreadsheet where the precinct commissioners can plug in any number of combinations of how we're going to raise additional money over the next 10 years to absorb and pay for all the improvements that need to be done in the next few years, in addition to the replacement of the Bound Tree plant in total. And that's now forecasted to be around 7 million. Of which we'll probably use capital reserve funds, we already have 2 in it now, and we're going to generate more as the revenues come in from the proposed rate increases. So about half of that would be covered by a capital reserve fund.
All right.
You okay?
I silenced it.
That's right, all right. So in the rate study, there are basically three different areas where one could raise money. The first one is the basic connection charge, which every user has to have, and that's currently $100 a year. The second item would be the actual water usage. And the rate now is about $4.50 per 1,000 gallons. That's low compared to basically everybody around us, and that's certainly one area that one would normally think of. The more you use, maybe the more you pay, but that's not necessarily what they're recommending. And of course, the third one is the property tax. So the commissions are going to be working on various combinations of that to figure out what's the right approach to raising the amount of significant money that we have to raise in the next 10 years. The next bill would be in 2025, and that would have the new rate increase in it. There's no more. The second bill went out, so we can't capture anything there. So the next increase you'd see it, those in the precinct, obviously, and the next bill would come out in next year. Any questions?
Yeah, what? How much, if any, of the new construction that's occurring in town is occurring within the district? You know, there's condos being built theoretically at some point on Cedar Street, that's in the water district. I don't know if those houses on Maple Street, if they were beyond the district or if they were.
They're beyond it, well, they're not beyond the district water, but they are on the wrong side of the road, if you will.
Gotcha. I guess what I'm driving at is if I built a house in downtown Kentucky, is there a fee for me to hook up to the water system?
$50.
$50.
Plus the, well, that's the hookup standard fee, but you also have to pay
So
for,
that- I mean, that-
the actual hookup from the street into your property.
So let's go back to the previous question. You know, was there new construction in the last few years within the water district? And if so, why are they paying $50?
That's the standard hookup.
Well,
Excuse me, it's not the hookup fee, it's just the fee to do it.
understood, but they should be, with what new construction is nowadays, they should be paying $5,000.
Well, they may be doing that from the street in,
Right, but I'm just saying,
which
is
on
that
their
something
ticket.
you guys are looking at as far as, are you allowed to charge them a fee to hook up to the water that you're providing?
Yes,
Yes.
and that's, well, maybe I'm not understanding your question. It's a standard $100 a year to be hooked up, period.
Once you're hooked up.
The actual hookup
Mhm.
is, I'm not sure what that is to actually jack into the water main,
Right.
but you would pay, the individual owner would pay from the street edge in essence into their property.
Understood. The actual like construction cost. What I'm asking is,
Yep.
I mean, in a lot of towns that I used to operate in, when you hooked up to the water or sewer system, you paid them a fee. You wrote a check.
I've got to get back to you now.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay,
I should, but I don't.
right. Well, that seems.
It hasn't come up in any of those discussions.
Well, I mean, that seems like something we should be looking at, because I understand the parameters of the district are not that large, but you know, if there is construction going on. Or properties on Maple Street being converted from a single family to a 4-family. Then there should be some mechanism in place to get money from the people that are profiting off the construction.
Good question. I'll have the answer next time.
Okay, thank you.
Else?
Has there been any further efforts on the lead pipe situation?
That's a long going thing and there's been no new They're
information.
still trying to
Okay.
figure out, the state's still trying to figure out, I think, how all these towns are going to actually pursue that.
Okay.
We had discussions about with the actual agent that's doing a precinct now,
Mhm.
how they've done it in some other places. And they literally they've dug up the spot right where the connection is at the street level. And they do 6 or 7 of those a day, and the cost of doing that is in the thousands.
Mhm. Yeah, I know from the presentation last time, I just wasn't sure if there was any new information.
That'll be coming slow over the next probably couple of years.
Okay.
Don, that's, the mandate for that's coming from the federal government.
Correct.
Is there a chance the federal government is gonna rescind that?
Your answer is as good as mine, and neither of them know anything about it.
Yeah.
I would hope so. I mean, it's a nationwide problem.
Anybody else? Yes,
I
Debbie.
guess one of the things that, along with that question, is how reliable is the grant that we are to get from DES? Do we feel confident?
Yes.
You mentioned approximate cost of $7 million looking down the road for maintenance and maybe total rebuilding of the Boundary plant.
Yes.
Is that maintaining the surface water as the source?
Yes.
Dawn, I think as the town contemplates more building, possible rezoning to building, how is that impact affecting what we're doing with our water system now? And we're taking into account, I mean, we really don't have a number. We don't know what will be approved or what the town is contemplating.
The system has more capacity now.
Mhm.
And so, the expected, I guess, growth rate could be absorbed by that.
And is that something that we should consider, as a town? What we're doing to our resources, just saying, because we're putting these extra funds into the water system. And we're also considering this other, so that will have an impact on many resources, and I think that's one of them. And I just would like to know that this kind of information would be knitted into the process of, building committees, zoning, and everything that's being considered.
I think it is. I mean, what Anna Wells is projecting, down 89,
Mhm.
at excess 6 and the other things of those numbers are, that information is coming forth, I think, and Neil probably can address that maybe more than I do, is that, all those factors are being put into the discussion, if you will.
Thank you.
I want to make sure I understood where you started, which is it accurate to say there's a debate around how much of this would be covered by fees on new users, as Steve was suggesting, or per 1,000-gallon fees or property taxes?
Mhm.
And therefore, how much of the burden would fall on new homeowners, existing homeowners versus only users of the water system
It's only the users of the water system.
under any circumstance?
Right.
Okay, but you could attach it to property taxes.
It is,
for those
it is
users.
attached to property taxes.
Got it.
The three variables are the $100 for just being connected, the usage, and the property tax.
But so the debate is, do you want to do it through property taxes, in which case everyone would just pay some amount more, or do it based on usage?
It'd be a lot more, and it's only the precinct for this slice of this discussion. But it's in various towns, it's done various ways. Sometimes it's always property tax. I got that out of the meeting today, I think. Sometimes it's strictly usage, and different towns have done it different ways. The study company that did this says we ought to stay sort of relative to the parameters that we're already using.
And you'll come back with a recommendation at some
Correct.
point?
As the precinct commissioners muddle their way through this.
You should charge the people who don't live here yet.
We're waiting. Unfortunately, most of them drill wells at $30,000 a piece.
What's the breakdown of businesses that are water users versus residential?
Pardon?
What's the breakdown between business and residential use on that water system?
I don't have that specifically, but that's sort of a question that I asked today. Are other towns much more business related and water usage for cleaning and whatever? And other towns have that situation. Ours is basically it's basically residential, and we have very little industry usage relative to the amount of residentials. I don't know if that answered your question.
I mean, I think you answered it as best as the information you have.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And they've recommended keeping it the way it is now, so we receive our water bill.
Well, not exactly the way it is. Those are the general parameters that there was nothing new and revolutionary of a different way to bill this.
I would like to see definitely a way that the homeowner could be conservation coming into that somehow. We use less water because we don't do this, or this, or we're very careful when we run certain things.
Mhm.
And so however the payment is done, I'd love to see it based on the fact that somebody could affect their own
Yes.
conservation
Yes.
of water.
You want to add anything, Neil, to the conversations that we had?
Only that the consultant said today that largely changing the rates does not really affect water usage.
Right,
That's their experience.
that was an interesting, it may change it for a year, but then it goes back to the old habits.
Or a month or two, and then it goes back. That was what they said. I'm just passing that along.
Going back to the water source question, and partially for my own curiosity, is it considered a more sustainable practice to use surface water versus groundwater or vice versa?
The state would like not to use surface water,
The state,
correct? And I'm sure that's pressured by
is
the
that
federal
because of the
government.
like the byproducts are more damaging or like,
It's just easier to, I think, control pollutants that might get into the system. Sabotage and all the other kinds of things that could get in there.
In Giardia bacteria,
Right.
the green scums that grow in the summertime.
You know, fish have trouble in wells and, you know, their defecations and all the other things that go into surface water.
interesting?
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dawn? Victoria, Hopkinton Village Precinct?
Thank you. There's nothing too exciting to report, except that we'd like to replace the roof on the old fire station, which is 2 doors down from the Cracker Barrel. The building, the actual building date is unclear, but it was gifted to the town in 1809, and the roof is from the 80s. And it's leaking, and there's issues with the eaves. So we've got, as of our last meeting, a bid of $8,000, which we thought was pretty reasonable to fix the eaves and replace the asphalt shingles. But for due diligence's sake, we're going to get at least one more bid. Our building maintenance line item every year is $5,500. So our goal would be to contract with someone who's willing to take 2 installments and pay them partially before the end of the year, and then pay the rest in the new year, so as to not overspend that line item. It's the only physical asset of the precinct, so I think it's important to keep it, especially since there's some priceless artifacts in it, so priceless that the insurance company will no longer insure the, oh darn, I can't remember the name of the wagon, I think it's called, no, I don't want to get it wrong, but there's a fire wagon in there from the 1800s. And it's hard to find someone who's willing to insure it, but the least we can do is make sure the roof doesn't leak all over it. So that's the major thing that we talked about at our last meeting. Although $8,000 in the grand scheme of this committee sounds like small potatoes, the whole budget is about $20,000. So it would probably add 4 or 5 cents per thousand to the tax rate for next year. And considering, I just looked it up, the tax rate on my tax bill is 23 cents per thousand for the precinct. So probably be something like 28 cents for next year. We don't have any other increases that we're anticipating. So at this point, as a percent change, it's kind of a lot. But again, smaller beer compared to all of our other conversations. And we think it's worth it, like I said, because of the sort of priceless artifacts that roof is currently housing. And I'll follow up, Steve and Debbie, your questions about what is the administrative fee to hook up to the water district? I don't know the answer to it for Hopkinton either. And what's the, progress of the lead pipe testing, which I don't anticipate as much considering the cost per house to do it. But I'll find out so that I can also update you on those two things.
Guys also have a much smaller footprint.
Yes, it's 200 houses in the village precinct that are, I think is that right? 220 houses in the precinct and 200 of them on the water.
And the most recent hookup was what, 1802?
I don't know, there's that, what I call the new house or whatever on Briar. But I'll still find out because that's important information to know. And just coming from, a Montessori school background, there are certain costs that were not directly related to tuition that were more of a per pupil cost. And so there was a yearly administrative fee that we used to charge families that was outside of how many days does your kid go to this school. And it was because certain costs are per pupil regardless, like insurance, regardless of how many days a week the kid goes. So I think that's somewhat akin to the $100 annual fee that, is charged to just be a part of the system. So I understand why that should be part of the recipe that might need to get changed as you look at increasing rates. Because some of the costs associated are probably not directly related to usage. It might be more of a per residence cost.
Thank you. Anything else?
And Vicky, just to understand the difference between the two systems in terms of billing, you don't have meters.
We don't have meters. That's right.
So it's your sales, your revenues are based on the number of fixtures as well as this $100 per.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna find out what our annual administrative fee is, if there is one. But yeah, there's a point system and various fixtures are awarded various points to say it in an easy to understand way. For example, a sink has a different number of points than a hose spigot. So depending on how many hose spigots and sinks you have, your particular building has a certain number of points associated with it, and then the rates are based on points.
So in following up on Debbie's very legitimate concern, conservation does not matter whatsoever in terms of billing.
No, it's impossible. It's impossible to tell how much water is being used by whom.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vicky. And we will go to Mr. Nato for the school district update.
Thank you. So you got a bunch of stuff for you tonight. I know that Ron and Rich had requested printed out copies of the spreadsheets, but I figured everybody would probably appreciate that to save you from scrolling across your screen and squinting. So I'll get to that in a few minutes. So the first thing you've got is the monthly financials and the quarterly data. Not really a whole lot to report there specifically. It's pretty early in the game for us. Projected fund balance right now is fairly low for this time of year at $80,000, but again, it's way too early to project much. In the monthly financial, you will notice if you scroll back to like page 7 or 8, we are very much upside down in special ed at this time of year. We've got about a $225,000 shortfall due to some transportation and outplacement costs that were not anticipated. You can expect in our December meeting that there'll be a public hearing to withdraw money from the special ed trust to cover those costs. So our special ed trust currently has $237,000 in it, and we'd be looking to withdraw I think right now the whole 225, but that'll be up for discussion. So I got a lot to talk about on the special ed front tonight. Our budget process, we did our initial presentation with our department heads and principals. And then our finance committee met and talked about what seemed reasonable and what needed some trimming. So we had asked Mr. Flynn and the business administrator to go back and trim some from the SAU budget, facilities, athletics. There were a few things that we just straight out cut. There was a request for an athletic trainer, although we haven't gotten into the personnel side of our budgeting yet. Dan made a very good pitch for why it would be something we would want to have, but we simply something we can't afford. So we'll continue to contract those services when we need them. Technology, we sought to make some cuts. And then other departments, the schools did a really, really good job. You know, one of the things that we look at, or at least I should say I look at, is previous year's budget. What did you ask for and what did you actually spend and what are the spreads? And they were really tight. And, you know, as you can see on your cover sheet, the differences for the schools is pretty minimal at $17,000. Harold Martin and Maple Street being down and the middle high school being up a little bit. So in the second round, we did ask them to go back and make some cuts. And you can see on the left-hand side of your sheet is how much was cut from each of those areas. So at the SAU, 11,500 was cut. And then in facilities, pretty big chunk, 72,409 was cut, most of that from grounds materials. Athletics is up. It's a little bit weird. We didn't cut anything beyond the Hawkmobile, but because Dan had requested the athletic trainer, he had taken his costs for the athletic trainer that we hire on contract out. So we had to put that money back in. So that's why it's showing a little bit of an uptick there. Curriculum was down about 4650, and then technology was down 38,450. So his increase is 36,000, but in that you have to understand that some money was transferred to cover and put all of our phone costs into that budget. So his increase is really more in the order of $9,000. Some specifics to highlight is special education. So the overall increase at this point after the first round of cuts is $1,191,000. Of that, $1,005,000 comes from special ed. So that is a 65% increase. And as I did some math here, the overall increase with everything at the, the 1,191,000 would be 22%. When you X out special ed, it's 4.94%. So,
Sorry, did you say 22 and 4.9?
yeah, so if we take everything as is right now, it's 22%, 22.45. If you take out the special ed number, it's 4.94. The special ed costs are predominantly around outplacements and continued transportation costs. There is in there, and it's very much, and I'm looking for feedback, $220,000 for anticipated student costs. So Mandy thought it was wise and Mike thought it was wise, given that we've been upside down the last 2 years, over $600,000 last year and over $200,000 the previous year for unanticipated costs. So this budget bills in $220,000 for if we get that student to come in, or if we have a change in placement that costs us a significant amount of money. The finance committee and the board, generally speaking, thinks this is a good idea versus having to try and find that money in other ways. Our question and what we're debating right now is, should this be in our budget or should it be as a separate warrant article where we ask for $220,000 for the special ed trust? And I would, as that percolates, we'd love some feedback from you guys on that as to what's the strategy that would be perhaps more palatable. questions so far? The other things, so that leaves an increase of 185,000 across all the other departments. And I asked Laura Taylor, who our new assistant BA, soon to be BA, to look at what of that 187 was increases to fixed costs. So she ran some numbers for me. And when you take out the increases to the fixed costs, things like buses and our software subscriptions, property and liability insurance, the utilities and updates we do for all of the things we buy through tech department. There's some money in there for paving and repair. I guess that's not necessarily a fixed cost, but it's certainly in the facilities world. We're left with about $30,000 in increases. So of the 187, most of that is due to increases in fixed costs, and the remaining part would be about $30,000 across all of those things. So pretty small amount.
Sorry, Rob, what is an example of a non-fixed cost then?
So things that we can make choices about. So do we replace projectors, right?
Okay.
So anything that, if you look through some of those sheets, you'll see in the middle high school, let me just kind of take a second to walk you through the way these laid out. These have changed a bit, what Laura did. So you can see, I'm in the SAU one right now. You can see the item in the budget unit in that business, and you can carry across on the right-hand side.
Hold on,
Okay.
slow down because we're
Yep.
not gonna track you.
Yep,
as
yep,
fast
yep.
as you're-
Sorry.
What,
How can I tell which one is the SAU one?
All right, it says proposed SAU budget report on the top,
No page number.
Oh, proposed curriculum.
right? So in the header, you've got your proposed, and there's one for curriculum, there's one for facilities, so on and so forth. You pick any one you want, and I've got the SAU one in front of me.
We'll go to SAU.
There we are.
Keep flipping people.
Proposed essay. You gotta work for my bundles. It's way down the bottom.
toward the back.
Nice with some numbers.
I'm probably almost there the first time.
This meeting was going too quickly.
Yeah, sorry. We'll go through all the sheets, so we'll be here till midnight.
Okay, I got it.
Okay.
Anybody else? Anybody else?
So for any given one, you would find the budget unit on the left-hand side. That tells you a broad category, general regular education, school board services, district treasurer services, et cetera. Then it's broken down into different account numbers after that. So if I stay in general regular ed at the top, you see repair and maintenance. For this one, it's replace equipment, dues and fees. If you scroll over to the far right-hand side are the budget justifications. So it will tell you what the money is being used for. So the replace equipment is our copier contract at $31,562. And then dues and fees, there's a reduction. So anything in parentheses has been reduced in usage, and then et cetera. So, and for any one of these, as you work through the budget justifications, if you see something in parentheses, it was cut either during the first round by admin. More likely than not, it was cut when we said to Mike after our initial presentation, go back and trim and or cut your budget. But that's where on the right-hand side, you'll get the explanation as to what it's being. And she tried to bucket them together. So they used to be all separate lines. Now it's one line goes across, total number, and then the justifications give you the amounts. So we hope that helps people to identify things specifically. And you should know as you're, if you get into the weeds on this, the middle high school is also broken down. So there's a middle school component and a high school component. They have to be accounted for separately.
Mr. Nato,
Yes, ma'am.
on the very first page of the SAU packet,
Yes,
in the legal services bucket,
yes.
can you help me understand why it says cut, increase in half, and then increase? Does that mean that the increase suggested was 20, but we're going to increase it by 10?
I believe that is correct.
Okay.
I would just like to note that I think it's been previously stated that we did not have enough clarity by various members of the public on what the spending was. And I am pleased to know that the general supplies for art education increase is due to the cost of clay and watercolors going up. So,
Yeah, big thank you for all of this detail.
It's been, this has been a multi-year process of kind of narrowing it down from 5 years to 3 years. And then this upgrade and consolidating lines, the justifications have always been there, but this is also out on the website at this present time. At least that's pretty sure what Laura told me this morning, that we finally were able to get it up there, so.
Rob, are salaries in here somewhere?
No. Personnel will be done next week. So this is just items that we purchase or services that we provide.
before we get to special ed, can you give like a teaser on what we expect out of salaries and benefits? Like at a high level, I'm just trying to think like, okay, 22%, 4.9% without special ed. Are we looking at are we coming in with like salaries and benefits of 20%, 5%?
So I can tell you this, we negotiated our HES contract last year, and I think the projection for this year was somewhere in the order of 160,000. I have to go back and look at that. We are dead smack in the middle of our HEA negotiation because that contract is up this year. And then we're also starting our Teamsters tomorrow. So I would love to give you more, but I really am not in a place where I can do that.
Remind me when we'll have that information.
Oh, we hope to have our negotiations closed up mid-December.
Okay.
So we should be in a good spot to have a better sense then.
Okay,
Um,
we'll circle back to that in the
Yeah.
context of when the next meeting will be then.
Yep. And I think you had asked if Mr. Flynn would be able to come in December, and I talked to him about that. So if that's still, the druthers of the committee, he's certainly be able to come in and, if people have specific questions about where we are at this point, and perhaps we'll know more. I mean, we could wrap up negotiations sooner and have some numbers to play with, but right now it's not really for public consumption.
All right, sorry, I did not mean to derail us.
Yeah, no.
Any questions for Rob?
There's a lot of information there. I get that. So as you look through, if you choose to do so, and you do have questions, just please email me directly and email me only. Okay. There's all kinds of things about if you email the board, then it's a public conversation. If you and I have a question, just email me so I can answer your question without getting into all of that business. Unless you want it to be a public document, that's your choice, but. So a few things, well, does anybody have general feedback on the whole putting the anticipated student costs in our budget versus putting it on a warrant? Is there any off the cuff thoughts on that?
Can you just clarify? So you basically mean it would be to replenish the fund via a warrant article, or it's just directly in the budget?
Correct. Right. So it would, yes, essentially that. It's either in the budget or we do it via a warrant article. So it's very clear what we're asking the money for, just as we're going to draw from that special ed trust this year. Next year, if we have another unanticipated situation, we have more funds to draw from.
But it's essentially purely aesthetic, right? Because if it's in the budget and those funds aren't used, they're going to end up in the fund at the end of the year, correct?
Well,
Or that would be our choice at that
that isn't,
point.
that's another discussion, right? Because if the funds aren't used, then it goes on into undesignated fund balance and it could be directed however. I personally have talked about this at our board meetings, that if we leave it in our budget and we don't use that money in special ed, then we need to agree as a board that it will be directed to that trust. Period. No, not what's going on at the end of the year and what do we need. It was designated for special ed. We didn't use it. Kind of like the healthcare scenario we had a few years ago when we got $200,000 back from Health Trust because nobody went to the doctors during COVID. We set up that trust and we ended up using that last year to help us out. So that's my thinking as a board member, but only my thinking as a board member at this point. We're still.
Isn't that the rationale to put it in the warrant though, is then there's complete clarity of like,
Right.
this was explicitly authorized for this. And then if we were to pour it in a warrant and the warrant were to fail, then what?
No means no. So then we'd be back in the same scenario of having to think about how to cover those costs. And, historically, from my time teaching, that meant budget freezes and certainly no hiring, and hope that there's enough fund balance at the end of the year to make it work. But the budget freezes, which, if you look at going back to like 2013, those might start to happen as early as October. It is a very difficult scenario. I mean, we've talked about this a lot. Special ed is not something that we get to choose when there's an outplacement. We are a part of that process, but if it occurs, we need to pay for it. And we got some not very good news from the state today, or yesterday. Maybe it was today, I forget. So as you know, we get $2,200 additional aid from the state for special ed students. That's regular. But if we have a student that costs us more than 3 times their per pupil state cost, then we get reimbursed at 80% from the state. If it's 10 times the per pupil cost, we get reimbursed at 100%. Sounds great, except that the state has budgeted $33 million to cover those costs statewide. They're projecting requests of $50 million this year. So, and this is maybe too much in the weeds, but I think it's important just in terms of the funding scenario. In 2023, that meant that if we requested $1, we got 98 cents. In 24, if we requested $1, we got 87 cents. This year, we will get 67 cents. The proration has dropped to 67.5%. So, this is another scenario where lack of, I'll just say, educational diligence on the part of the state is going to be something that's going to affect us in how we have to budget. Good times.
That's good to understand, Rob. The state is going to be going into, I think, a pretty tough budget cycle. Because we've benefited from a lot of federal short-term COVID and other federal funds, which are not going to continue. So I think overall, this is going to be a tough budget cycle in the state. So we shouldn't be anticipating that that's going to reverse. Probably will, if we're projecting or prognosticating, which is always dangerous, but that rate will continue to drop.
There is good news. Oh,
That's good.
you got the good news first? You want a question first?
No, I guess going back to the original question, so basically 25% of your increases make up money for your special.
Essentially,
education.
yes.
So yeah,
Or just in case money.
So
I
I
mean,
would-
as
I
I
would-
said, the last 2 years, just in
Yep.
case was,
so yes, I would urge you to put that in a warrant article for transparency.
I
Can you
would,
help me understand? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to second that as well. I think it's very important. I think some of the members of the community feel that from, feedback I've heard over the years is that if there's $220,000 that can be moved around, that they feel a little uncomfortable with that.
fair.
It strikes me as a bit odd to put legally obligated funds in a warrant article. So it's sort of like saying we have to pay this
But these funds haven't.
Would
been
you like
spent.
to pay this?
I don't read it quite like that because I agree, like, don't put the whole special ed budget in a warrant article, but from what I understand, roughly 200K is a anticipated, like, unknown, but perhaps anticipated increase, which strikes me as, which gets to the question that I was gonna ask, so I'm just gonna ask it. This year, there was an unanticipated increase, right, which is why you're drawing from the fund. So is the thought that because of that, like, how unanticipated is the 200K next year? Is it like, well, we have a hypothetical student who's not graduating, and so hypothetically, that cost will continue? Or do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. So I'm gonna be careful in
Right.
answering. It could be that scenario. It could be that, as we look back 4 and 5 years where there were upticks, it is more likely than not that we will have unanticipated costs. And trying to average what those costs are is what we're trying to do. And, just to sort of, again, to go back, 23-24, $676,000, and then 22-23, $240,000.
Over budget. Saying
Over
those are
budget.
numbers, yeah.
Yes.
So Ron, do we, I know you have to be really careful how you answer, but what came to my mind through Krista's question is, if it's an older student, then our expenses would be shorter term, but we have to provide for that student however many years at whatever grade they're at, if most likely.
It's
because
actually to the age
need
of
that they
21.
have. Do we currently plan for that? So if a student were to come in and they are requiring X amount and they're, middle of the grade, are we planning to have the money? It hits us hard the first time. And then
Yes.
what's our cushion? What do we do when we know we have a student that we have to provide for
Right.
for several years?
That is a large part of this uptick in this budget
Mhm.
is because of that very thing. So the shortfall, it's not to be lost on anybody that the shortfall last year of 676,000 is very close to the increase, taking out the unanticipated. So that's, we have to take care of that this year and put that money in the budget. Because
So
these are now our students.
some of this is to help with that projected need for the future years. Putting it in a warrant article just makes me a little nervous, obviously, because it could be, you vote it up, you vote it down, but these are expenses that have to be met. And putting it in a warrant article, we would need to do, the school or whoever needs to do some really good explaining that, these are costs that have to be met. It may still be turned down, but
We are currently
Risky.
working on documentation and data that shows the last 5 to 8 years and where that spending has been and what has been unanticipated so that people can get a sense of where shortages fall.
I think my, where my current head is at is if it is more anticipated than unanticipated, then it's probably a budget line item. But if it is, but what I thought, where we thought we started the conversation was more in the sense of we are taking roughly 200K out of the special ed trust fund, bringing it pretty close to zero from what I wrote down. And next year, based on priors, we know that unexpected things can happen. So it would be kind of dangerous for us to move forward with a special ed trust fund at zero and have zero buffer. And so we're going to ask to refund the special ed trust fund. In which case, that seems to me a rationale, like a very logical thing to do. But if it's like, hey, we think actually we're gonna need 800K next year, not 600K, then that feels like, well, you already know that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, everything that we anticipate. So in other words, this $200,000 is now in this year's budget. Okay. $200,000, that's anticipated. We assume it's going to continue. It's going to be in this year's budget. What's not is Rob Nato moves to town and needs certain services, and it's going to cost us $100K, and we had no idea he was coming.
So would the warrant article be specifically replenishing a special ed trust?
I'm not sure the replenish part, but to be used for unanticipated, however we choose to explain
Word it?
Yeah.
think I'm
I
getting-
think to replenish, oftentimes one of the things we have is these trust funds that we seldomly use, right? This is the first time in my going on 5 years on the board that we've used the special ed trust fund. So, but we're in a scenario where this is the logical thing to do. It's its purpose for being there. So whether it's to replenish or because of the history and the data that we have that says this could occur, we don't want to, as Rich says, necessarily just put it in and then have it go to undesignated fund balance. We want to try and be as clear with where that money is going and what its intended use is.
Do trust funds gain interest?
Yes. Egypt.
I guess I really like, kind of swayed by what Krista said, if it's because, particularly because of the nature of this issue where we just all acknowledge there's certain confidentialities that you have, the school board and the administration have to maintain here. And so as a budget committee, we're going to be operating with, less granularity than we might have on another issue, especially of such magnitude on the budget. So it has to be okay. Right. And so we really have to look to you, to the school board and the administration on your judgment on, is it likely based on your best information and knowledge of the details that we don't have? Is it more or less, is it likely that we think we'll incur this, in which case I'd say put it in the operating budget, or is it a possibility? And then I would advocate for putting it as a special warrant article. I think that's sort of similar, maybe not exactly what you were saying, Krista. And you're the best judges of where are you on that spectrum of a possibility, which is what a trust fund's for, I think, versus a likelihood, which I think is more of an operating budget.
Would you restate again, Rob, how old is the child that was still obligated to fund the special education? Is it 21 or is it beyond that?
21.
21, okay. So you've got a pretty good idea, I would assume, through the history of the various students that are in this, what that elongated time is going to be.
It really comes down to two scenarios. One being a student that moves into town that we have, unaware of, or a major change in placement that we were not anticipating.
Is it
One of
fair-
those two things.
Is it fair to use the verbiage of unanticipated if we know it's an expense that will be incurred for at least the next few years that we need to provide?
Yeah, those are going to be in the budget. We have the student and we can project how long he or she will be with us and at what level of services we need to provide. That's going to be in the budget.
Thanks for clarifying that. That's really what I was getting at.
Yeah, thank you.
Which method do you think is the best way for the school board to explain the 200,000 or the $400,000? What vehicle is better?
I mean, I think,
Because to me, that's the key. Because
Right. I think for me, it all comes down to who's going to explain it on the floor. If it's in the budget, then I'm going to be explaining it as I'm explaining the increases to the budget and why we have unanticipated costs in there. If it's in a warrant article, then whoever has that opportunity is going to be explaining the same thing. We're going to break it out one way or the other. I think the risk is no means no. So wherever people are at come March, if they say no, we're in the same situation. Now, on the other side of that, they could simply say, we're going to cut $220,000 from your budget. that still leaves us now to move money around, right? To make that all happen, because as we know, if money gets cut from the floor, we get to say how much, but not from what. So my personal druthers would be to say in the budget with the caveat that if it is not spent, it's going to be dedicated to the trust. That would be my first choice. But right now, I'll be honest, I could be swayed. This is just tricky.
I just think it's, as the budget is going to be obviously increased by a lot, more than 1 million. That the clearer you can make this explanation all by itself would be an easier way to get it passed. If it gets buried in the dialogue of you've got $1.5 million, $2 million budget increase, and people are going to be swarmed over that, they're going to lose the focus of the special ed, which is really the big McGill here. And everything else being equal, I think whichever method is better to explain the significance of this and the history of this is the better way to go.
Yeah. In my mind, that is why I would lean at this point, although I can be swayed also toward the Warren article, because I think it is, if the operating budget covers the students currently in the system, then you have a clean explanation that this budget covers all the students in the system for as long as we anticipate they will be in the system. However, in the past, often we have a new student enter the system for whatever reason. And because we withdrew money from the fund balance or from the trust fund this year, we will not have a trust fund next year. Therefore, we're asking to fund the trust fund in the event that we have another student enter the system next year, so that we're not scrambling for funds. I realize that you do run, I mean, it is unavoidable. You run the risk that no means no in a tough budget system. So that is a trade-off. But I think that, to me, at least, that's like the cleanest explanation of what's happening. Historically, we have had a lot of questions around fund balance, what happens to funds in the fund balance. Like, you also run the risk of a perception, like, did you really trim everything you could out of the operating budget? And then you have to explain, well, there's this kind of like buffer for special ed. And I worry that that just is less transparent.
I just wanted to make one point on, and the reason I asked Ken to let me look at his, you have no justifications for your special ed budget report, and that is for privacy concerns, because those justifications reveal information that are not for the public. Okay, so if you're wondering why it's not there, that's why it's not there.
I'd just like to add that in my 10 years or so on this board, I've never seen the town of Hopkinton at school district meeting cut $200,000 off a warrant article. So I don't understand what the worry is that no means no. I've never seen it. So I think putting something on a warrant article is safe. And, you know, if there's a concern about replenishing the special education reserve fund, I think that is a perfect example of good budgeting to, okay, we pulled this down to zero, we need to replenish it, or whatever verbiage you used to use, and it's pretty safe to do that in this town.
Rob, could you just clarify what has been the historical long-term balance in the trust fund over the last 10, 20 years?
For the special ed trust?
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, that'd be tough to do. It hasn't seen a lot of increases. It's been pretty stable in that low 200s for, yeah, I think we probably put some money in there 2 or 3 years ago. I'd have to check. I'm not sure.
Following up on what Charlie asked,
Gonna wrap this up on
did
that,
you
though.
say that other than this year, you really haven't had to take any money out of that reserve?
I didn't say we didn't have to. I said we didn't.
Okay.
No, see, and that was, the strategy was we're gonna freeze budgets. Versus we're gonna use the trust for its intended purpose.
Rob, just one last thought from me. I mean, On the, I guess the piece around, if we keep it in the budget, the 200,000, this, you know, with an, as you said, you would feel okay potentially if the school board quote agreed, you know, to move that into the special ed trust fund in the event it wasn't spent, but that's not like a binding agreement. Right? I mean,
I
I
think
guess
if-
I'm asking, could that
Yeah.
be a binding agreement? Because if it's not a binding agreement, like for me, I'd say I trust the school board and yet I wouldn't trust that as a non-binding agreement because stuff happens. All sorts of things that we can't anticipate might
Right.
happen during the course of the school budget year that would cause any individual member to say, yes, I know we said that, but now we have this thing. And so I'm just curious if that.
Yeah, I mean, again, speaking as a board member, I would ask for a vote in public, and that would be as binding as I can make it for you. I'm sure one of our legal counsel might have something to say about what makes it binding and not binding, but public vote would make it binding as far as I'm concerned.
We've had other votes of public at the school board meeting, and the town voted a certain way and the school turned it around. So I agree. It's not, it can happen that it gets changed. Different board members, different this, different that.
That's just how I would see it.
Mhm.
But I hear you. That was very helpful feedback, by the way, on that issue. Want the good news?
When would you expect to make a decision on that?
I think once the overall budget is, we have all the personnel numbers, at that point, we'll make a decision, seeing where our numbers fall and whatnot. So good news side, healthcare increase was under 6%, which is significantly, it's not double digits in the 15 to 19%. So we're pretty excited about that. And we did have 2 safety grants come our way, one for 135,000. And then in the second round, we got another 95,000. So 230K for Homeland Security type stuff. Those will go towards panic buttons and cameras, credentialing system, and some intercoms. And I'm pretty sure there's a few other things that haven't been designated yet. But so Jim Rizicki is still doing a good job writing those grants and bringing in some money for us.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
And if I could just ask you to hold on with me for 2 more minutes, I want to answer Dawn's question from last spring about what we can do in special ed. And this is very much at this point, 30,000 foot view. So I was thinking about that question a lot and literally out on my bicycle, thinking about economies of scale and why it's so hard. And the reason special ed costs us so much when we have outplacements is we're sending kids to the seacoast and to southern New Hampshire and sometimes out of state. And in New Hampshire, we have regional vocational centers. So my thought began to be, why don't we have regional special ed centers? So Mike Flynn and I started having conversations about that and the realities of it. Personally, as a board member, I reached out to some people that are consultants in the education world and, what would it take? And it's difficult, right? You have management costs, you have teacher costs, you have facilities costs, all of those things, which means you have to get surrounding towns to have some buy-in. And then we've got some economies of scale where perhaps we have a regionalized special ed system that can service certain students that we are now having to send to, Spalding or wherever they're going. I think as this budget system is coming through and revenue from the state, this kind of thinking is maybe going to gain a little traction among superintendents and have more discussions about, is this something that's possible in the Concord area? For me as a board member, it'll be something that I continue to talk to Mike about and that hopefully he will continue to talk to regional superintendents about. This is down the road kind of stuff. But again, I just kind of think about, we really have to do a better job about what we're doing. And I think I spent too much time on my bike, but I was up on Kearsarge Mountain Road and riding by Magdalen College, which is now just a shell. And I'm thinking, this is the perfect place for this kind of a facility. It's residential, it's got classrooms, it's got everything you need, and it's empty. So I hope that in the state of New Hampshire, Don, that people can begin to think in that way, just as we do about vocational programs for special ed programs, because otherwise we're going to continue to pay exorbitant money for transportation. You know, half the cost of sending somebody to Spalding is $80,000 in transportation costs. It's insane.
Wouldn't it be nice if our state legislature had that kind of a concept going through their mind? And number two, it was 6 or 7 years ago when I was asking Steve Chamberlain that same question, when we were thinking of going to 2 schools rather than 3 schools. His comment to that was, I could almost see him saying this, I could almost see we turning Maple Street into exactly what you're saying, into a profit center, and we'd make a lot of money. So it's interesting that you've come around to that kind of thinking. It's great.
One of the things that came up is, again, these are just sort of conversations with Mike and I. Insurance companies, it gets very, very expensive to get insurance. Primex is leery of anything that's, you know, residential. So there's a lot of hurdles, but I think the costs are now building up enough that perhaps regional superintendents and even, you know, perhaps the commissioner would give us some help, maybe a little less focus on vouchers and a little bit more focus on special ed costs
Good.
would be nice.
Rob, how does the Concord School District handle it, the special ed students? Is it the same as us? They have to send them or some of them out of the area, or do they have this capability in-house to handle?
I think, I don't know specifically about Concord's programs, but I can tell, you know, the larger the school, the more capacity to have a program for autistic kids, right? So you've got enough kids, enough scale that you can do that and don't have to service them someplace else. So those kinds of things happen, but I think every school district at some point has to place a student out because they just don't have the specific skills or services that child requires.
Do we talk to Concord about sending some of our students there that autistic or whatever, that they might be able to include them with their
Yeah, I think all of their programs are within their schools, not necessarily separate from their schools. They did have a program, I believe, at White's Farm that was connected to the hospital at one point in time. I don't know what their capacity was, but yeah, that was a similar model that they were using.
just think it would be a lot less expensive to pay their tuition to Concord as opposed to sending somebody to the seacoast.
I think if it was available right now, we'd be doing it. I take the point well.
The last school board meeting, I asked 2 questions. One of them was, is Hopkinton doing more in special ed than what we are required by law to do? And the answer to that was, no, we're not. We're doing what we should be doing, and it meets the standards. The second question was, I've always felt and heard from various people that people in Concord who are handling families say, whatever you can do, get to Hopkinton because it has the best special ed program around. Whatever you do, rent, whatever you do, get here. And I asked that of the school board to try to come up with that answer. And a member of the school board called back and basically said that in that person's opinion, that it has equalized around the state more than, in this general area rather, it has equalized more than it used to be, i.e., if you went to Pittsfield or you went to Hooksett or you went to other places, it might not have been as good as it was in Hopkinton, but she felt that has all equalized at this point. Which is, you know, it's good to hear that we're doing what we should be doing. And we're not doing, in quote unquote, that extra that is perceived at times.
Rob, perhaps you said it already and I missed it, but how much does it cost in very round numbers to have outplacement services and transportation to send a child to the seacoast?
I think you're probably looking in the 125 range to 150.
Thank you.
Are there You had mentioned residential. I don't think I thought of this before. So the students are going to the Seacoast, they're going there every day, pick up and come home to the Seacoast every day. Is that what's happening?
I've got to be really careful
Okay.
here. I would say, yeah, I'm not sure I want to answer that one.
Sure. Let me ask a different question.
Okay.
Are there residential special ed facilities where the student lives there?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm only asking because I actually have an employee that's been to both of the facilities in Concord where they send some of their kids. So the White's Farm and the Second Start, whatever it's called on Fisherville Road. So are those facilities you're saying those are just for Concord residents? Or are they open to the surrounding towns similar to the CRTC program?
Yeah, I don't know what their capacity is. My guess is that because we haven't accessed them, at least to my knowledge,
Okay.
that they've probably got more than enough need in Concord to.
I just want to make sure, because you just represented that all of these avenues have been explored, so. I'd like to know that that is the case, that all those avenues have been explored.
Most appropriate is setting is the key phrase in special ed. So when you're looking for that, you're also looking, this is me speaking again, not the school board speaking, but you want to do what's right for that student. And for me, if I was a parent, I would want the least amount of travel possible for my student. So, but those are all, again, team decisions that are made. And when I say team, it's the special ed director, it's the special ed teacher, it's the psychologist, it's everybody on board, it's the parent, it might be an advocate involved. All of those decisions are made there. I think the most important thing for us is the funding mechanism and how we're going to do it. So we will continue to look, Mr. Houston, ask questions, and hopefully people will see that need.
Do you have anything else to present, Rob?
I hope not. No, I think that's it. I'm looking through my list here and I think I've covered everything.
Any other questions? Vicky, I feel like I saw you had a question like
No, I wanted to,
really a long time ago.
I think you articulated what I was thinking very well, Krista. I just thought for clarity's sake that I seem to favor the warrant article.
That seems to be the consensus. Okay.
Any other comments, questions? Rob? Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. It was a good discussion.
Excellent job.
All right, the next agenda item is to finalize the meeting schedule, which brings us back to the conversation we had a little bit earlier on this topic. So where we left it last meeting was that we agreed to revisit this basically on whether another meeting in December was necessary or possible. So the present meeting on the calendar, oh, Neil put one on. Oh, wait, this was already on there, I think. Sorry. Okay. So we will currently have a meeting on December 11th, where the town will present the budgets. And then on the 18th, the next week, tentatively, is the Kentucky Village Precinct, Hopkinton Village Precinct, and follow-up from the town. I think it was the 18th meeting that we were considering swapping, meaning moving that meeting to January and asking Mike or just Rob to deep dive the school budget a little bit more. Are there any thoughts on, I do think we should have 2 meetings in December. Do folks have strong opinions on what would be most useful for the 18th based on what we know from tonight?
How far along will this school budget and
That was my question.
Mike's information be on December 18th?
Mhm.
I would think that we're going to have a pretty decent thumbnail sketches to where we're at. It will be the final, what we're gonna bring. We'll still be looking for feedback at that point, obviously. So. Given, so long as our revenue numbers come in a timely way, and they're supposed to be in the next 10 days or so. And our contracts are wrapped up, and we should be in good space. So, and I would suspect that by the 18th, both of those things would be true.
Debbie?
I'd like to see more on the school, actually, on the 18th. To get some more information for that, I think, so that we, as we move into January. We have a foundation.
Well, on the 18th, would there be time for follow-up on the town presentation and if any of our department heads were requested?
I think. So I have a proposal. It seems to me like the Kentucky Village Precinct and the Hopkinton Village Precinct do have thorny items, but are unlikely to be surprising. Right? Is that
Hold your breath.
okay?
Yes, that's correct from my perspective.
It would give me a little more time because I'm not sure the precinct is even gonna meet until
Okay,
the
great,
second week in December.
great. So let's move the precincts to
Jan-
115.
That makes sense.
January 15th.
115?
115, yeah.
Okay.
And then because I presume that we will have less follow-up on the school, if the school is coming on December 18th and then coming back on January 8th.
Okay.
Hopefully. And that would allow then, we would do on the 18th, it'll be like a school preview and follow-up from the town.
Mhm.
That fair, Ken?
That's fine.
Possibly a long meeting,
I'm just thinking if
and I won't
any
be
of our
here.
department heads are requested, could we go first? Because I think most of the time will be spent on the schools.
Do you want to get in a cage match with the superintendent?
What,
Neil will.
what if we move the town follow-up and any department heads to the 15th of January also?
Okay,
That's another way
Yeah.
to do it.
So move that whole meeting to the 15th, and then the school has plenty
Okay.
of time, and then we'll have that much more information if you
Yeah.
have questions.
the only risk to that is it won't be fresh in our minds, but we'll have to make sure we all take good mental notes between the December 11th and January 15th then. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. Great.
It's unclear to me if the February 19th line is a meeting, or is this just a placeholder to remind us of a deadline?
That's a reminder that you have to have your budget done then.
Okay,
Okay,
Because you have to really finish your budget deliberations before the public hearing, and then you have your final deliberations after that, and then the paperwork has to be in by then by law.
I don't recall using all 4 weeks in January in prior years. So I suspect we will,
I think last year you only used 2.
yeah,
The year before you used all 4,
okay.
and then
thanks.
an extra. I think it was 4th grade
Goodness, what
teacher.
memory he has. Do you remember what shirt you were wearing that day?
And the only other thing on the schedule, if the budget hearing on February 12th, that was still to be determined. So if that works for you, it would be on the 12th with the 13th as the snow date.
Okay. Yep. Wednesday, February 12th.
Yep.
Great. Any other comments on the meeting schedule? So just to repeat, that means on the 18th, the school is going to come in. And then the currently scheduled village precincts and follow up with department heads is going to move to the January 15th meeting. And the public hearing will be on February 12th. Great. Okay, public comment. Thank you, folks, for waiting through all of that. We need to get you a microphone. You may also sit down if you would like.
Okay.
And yes, please state your name and your address for the record.
Christopher Gross, 76 Checkerberry Lane. First thing, the special ed warrant article versus budget. I think it needs to be a warrant article. If we put it in the budget, you're artificially inflating the budget for years to come after that. You'll look back at the following year and say, well, we budgeted $250,000 in that account. It will be just accepted the next year that that's the amount that we'll budget for in perpetuity. So I see no other way other than a warrant article to do that. I work for the state budget office. I've spent the last 2 days with the governor and governor-elect doing state budgeting. I'll spend tomorrow with them as well. They probably won't be there tomorrow. Some people might think that it's hard times at the state house because federal money is drying up, and it is. ARPA's gone, and that's that. But the governor gave all of the agencies this year sort of a target for their budgets, and that was -4%. It was made very clear today in the budget hearings that it should be anticipated that that -4% is a -8%. Now that we're in the governor's phase of the budget, expect to cut another 4% off the top for every agency. And I find it disappointing that we as a town are happy when we see, oh, we only went up 3%, 4%, 5%, especially with a school budget that's $26 million. We have to find a way to do better. We have to find a way, if it means a flat budget, if it means cuts. I mean, those things stink. I understand that, but it's not affordable what we're continuing to do. And we've got this $7 million project coming up in the village. We've got this hazmat issue at the dump. These are things that we're straddling taxpayers with, and we're straddling our kids with, or we're bonding these things out for 20 years. So that's just my 2 cents on that. We've got to find a way to do better. The special education budget item for $1 million, the increase for $1 million. I'm confused because I'm listening tonight and the math doesn't math. We're saying that we were short 600,000 or so in previous years. So we're budgeting $1 million more, but we're also thinking of adding another 250 or 220 on top of that. So can you explain that million?
Yeah.
Can you explain that $1 million increase?
Yeah, so the million includes the 220 for the anticipated. If you take that out, we're down
Okay.
to about 700, which is about what the shortfall was for students that we are now.
Okay, so if you go ahead with the warrant article, then we'll see that come down. And we were short $700,000, let's say, this previous year because of unanticipated expenses. So I know you can only say so much, but people moving into the town or something in that situation that just wasn't foreseen. Okay. I didn't really have any more questions. Just needed to know how we got to that $1 million. So thank you, guys.
Amanda Gilman, 168 Westward Circle. Just point of curiosity, who owns the priceless fire wagon in the precinct?
Oh, the Hopkinton Village Precinct owns it.
Would they ever sell the priceless fire wagon?
I don't know how they would price it or who would buy it.
Okay. Right, if it's priceless. Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to reiterate Mr. Gross's point about putting the 200,000 for the trust into the budget because it falsely inflates the budget. And then next year it makes the budget, any budget increase then look like it's not much when really it's an extra 225,000. So it's definitely like a shell game if you do it that way. And I find it kind of disingenuous to put it forth that way. I am curious, Mr. Nato, how much of the special ed budget is attributed to consulting firms? Because I see, contracted services all over the place, but do you have a number of like what, because I believe we have 2 consulting firms from what I understand, William White and then Bethany Bilodeau lady?
I don't know those people because I don't go that deep into it, but consulting also could fall under different categories in terms of what's accounted for. I can explore and tell you.
I'm just curious, I'd like to know like how much we're paying for outside consultants, because I know we do have at least 2 companies that are in, specifically for behavioral is
Yeah.
a big part of it. And I'm curious as to how much it's costing us and how much of an increase that is so not only this year, but also last year. Because I think, and I'm wondering what the outcome measures are for these consulting firms, because from my understanding, and this is anecdotal, but that, there's no outcome measure. So if their measures fail and the patient, I work in healthcare, the student needs to be transitioned to an external facility, well, the consulting firm still gets paid. There's no vested interest. They don't care. And I brought this up to Mr. Flynn last year saying, why don't we hire our own behavioral consultant? Why don't we kind of along the lines of this regional concept? Because we're spending, I believe, a lot of money in consulting. And it frustrates me to think that if we had our own employee, perhaps we would have somebody who has a vested interest in our students, our district, as opposed to consulting firms who likely just are focused very much so on a paycheck. So if you could, I would love to have those 2 numbers, and that's my own personal, but the numbers are really what I'm interested in. Thank you. Well, that was it. I said it all at once. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate all your time.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up that a little bit? Because I would hope that the people that we hire to provide services for our students do care about what they're providing. I take a little bit of umbrage with that characterization of really anybody who works with kids in education. So I just, words are
I don't
important.
mean to be offensive at all.
No, I just, I think I've seen a lot of people work in a lot of different ways in schools, whether they're consultants, which essentially means if they're hired from the outside versus being members or paid directly through the school district, an organization. And I always feel like people have good intentions. And I think that that's important. So I understand your point, but yeah, that's all.
Evening, everybody. Lauren Clement, 86 Maple Street. Got a few notes here that I made from tonight's discussion. I'd like to jump back to Don asking questions at the school board meeting 2 meetings ago. I guess his interpretation of the answer to the question, one of his questions was a little different than how I heard it. And so I feel it pertinent to share my thought. What my take was when Don asked, are we adequately educating special ed students? What level are we meeting their needs? Because that's ultimately what we're required to do, is adequately meet the needs of all of our students and provide a safe environment. And to me, it asks, are we possibly giving these kids the Harvard special ed education? Are we giving them the above average? Are we giving them the mediocre? And I don't think there was a specific answer to that. What the answer I perceived was that regionally we are locked into not having facilities, as Rob alluded to, within a reasonable travel distance. So adequately educating them was the answer, but that didn't, in the same breath, it didn't say that we aren't paying for a Harvard style above adequate education. So I just wanted to make that point because I think it's important. And I'm not saying that there's a different means, but they said regionally we're here, and whether it's Seacoast or Massachusetts, or I don't know if it's up to Lebanon or whatever, there just isn't 4 options that we get to choose from. So there's not too much price shopping is how I perceived the answer. So that was my understanding of it. And I may be wrong, but that's how I perceived that. I'm gonna third the item to adding into the special ed. I believe what was said, and I'm still a little confused because I take notes while I'm listening here. And I believe it was 220 was anticipated cost for the 25-26 calendar year. And that's based on trends of students' needs going up or students coming into district. That is not to cover the $1 million increase or the 700,000, 720,000, less the 220, sorry, going backwards here. Those are already factored in for this coming year, and then they will follow out. So this is a safety net for unknowns. And am I clear on that? Is that so if that's the case, and I know we're going preemptively because you said there's a potential of removing money from the special ed trust, which we haven't done yet. So we're kind of forecasting here, but it sounded like we might be leaving $5,000 left in the trust. So with all that said, I would, if we're going to add to that line item, I would absolutely prefer to see it go to replenishing or specifically for the special ed trust. So there's a safety net there that the district can lean on if they need it, not bloat that budget. On that line, we haven't discussed we're throwing 220 in there hypothetically. Would it not be on the other hand, hypothetical that a student leaves district and saves us 220 and then we're 440 over budget? That would be a possibility in the same sense it's a possibility that someone moves into district. So that to me would be another reason not to over fluff that budget. I also had notes of if we had a student that had specific needs, but we cannot, they'd moved into district and we need to do something immediately, but on the long term, if they're going to be with us for 8 or 10 years, is it possible that we could subcontract a specialist that could serve that specific child's needs in district? We just had a bond and added to some of our facilities. Maybe there's room for that. It potentially could also reduce transportation. And I know if I was a parent of a child, that would kind of stink to be sending them an hour ride in the morning, hour ride back 5 days a week. That's a lot of windshield time for a kid that's special needs. It'd be nice if they could get served and get a little more time with a specialist. Rob kind of explained the difficulties with insurance and whatnot, but maybe that's a possibility. Another thought that came to mind is at year end, we have fund balance and we've used it the last couple of years to put 200,000 into capital improvement plan. That is because our other trusts were up. If we're going to tap special ed down to only having $5,000, is it not an option that we could use some of this year's fund balance or the following year's fund balance to, instead of funding CIP, getting the special ed fund back up to where there's a safety net in place? Obviously, special ed is imminent, important, have to do, and as Rob alluded, if we don't have the funds, you then have to freeze budgets and it throws everything off. If we kicked out a project out of CIP, like say, I don't know, replacing a roof that doesn't need to be replaced for another year, we could cover the special ed needs and move on. I also was curious if it's possible to lean on Article 10 for special ed needs, and or if out of our Article 10, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, is around 900,000, if we could transfer money out of that Article 10 fund to place into special ed, reducing the Article 10, but putting it in a different designated special ed fund. So if we had a need to lean on special ed, we then have some funding allocated for it. Also, as the need for special ed goes up, the percentage of revenue goes up. So obviously there was some safety net in there, but 700,000-800,000, well, plus the previous year's budget, we're looking at 2.5 million of special ed. I know Rob said that the percentage we get back has reduced from previous years and the years before, but there most certainly is some revenue that comes back specifically from the upfront expense of special ed. And it's an opportunity there. There's an opportunity there, instead of dumping that just into the general fund, to immediately throw that into the special ed trust. And that could help with emergencies down the road to replenish that special ed fund. Amanda was discussing consultant firms, and on a line of that, I was curious, we often discuss full-time employees, how many FTEs. There's a chart in the book. I don't know offhand if full-time employees and a consultant, like I believe there's some IAs that are consultants, and then there are some behavioral specialists, and I don't know how many specialists we consult, but are they considered a full-time employee or are they not? And then if they aren't, that seems like it should kind of be denoted in that line that we also have consulted 6 other people. Just food for thought. One other thing that when the school board and the select board had a joint meeting, I brought up in public comment, and it's more of a housekeeping issue, or it's not an issue, but it's a budgeting factor, is in our district, we're kind of unique where the Department of Public Works plows all the schools and the SAU out, and the schools don't subcontract that work out or don't do it in-house. And on top of that, they also do not maintain the grounds that all the ballparks and fields. So that's on the DPW, whether it be at George's Park or over at the Houston Fields. So that's equipment maintenance, manpower, insurance on those people. And I believe there's a generator up at the high school that also is on the town budget. To me, even though it all comes out of the same pocket, that's a item that would be interesting to see overall expense listed somewhere in the budget, because it does, it to me really is a school item or school use, and it'd be nice to see that included in the school's budget. And lastly, I field a lot of questions people have questions about the budget and are intimidated to come up here, sit here and ask them. Some of them are difficult to ask. Some people just don't like to public speak. What is the best way to, if people have line item questions out of this budget that are of concern, to address the board? Is it best to send an email, and how does that get to everybody, or is it best to not address it to everybody? And if we could get some feedback on that, that would be helpful. And I guess I had one more.
Hey, Lauren,
Yep,
let's make sure this is the last.
it
one.
is.
Okay.
The last one is at last year's 2 annual big meetings, people were concerned about literature coming to them because the jumbotrons and stuff were a little hard to read. And as you guys know, SB2 was on both the as a petition warrant and got over 50% of the vote. It's possible we could move to SB2. So I'm just wondering, it won't happen this year, but it could happen in the future if people are focusing on how to better get this information out to more people. So that wraps it up.
Thank you. Just tactically, what is the best way for, I believe you can submit like letters to the budget committee to be included.
Well, if they're school board related, they should go to the school. board,
Sure.
Because the details in the budget wouldn't be a budget committee
Right,
question at this point.
right.
They can email to me and I'll send it to the whole board. And we send everything to the board blind CC to assure the right to know is met.
Okay, can somebody submit, and I know, similar question in context of the skate park, like folks were like, can I write a letter supporting? I assume you can write a public letter to the board, to either board, if that's your method of preferred communication as well.
And those always go, I'm sure the school.
Okay.
heads do, they always go to the select.
So questions or comments, I believe, can be submitted in writing to Neil and he will disseminate them. Any other public comment? Okay,
Hi, miss you guys. Norm Gupel. Just gonna talk as a taxpayer.
can you say your address also, Norm?
Where do I live? 121 Amesbury Road.
Yeah.
You're welcome. I don't even know where to begin with that, but I'm just gonna say one comment. We talked about where money comes from. You know, we talk about taking money from here and here and here. Article 10, very sacred. You know, we've used that in the past, reduce the tax rate as additional revenue. When we talk about taking it out for this and this and this, it's kind of like thinking it's just an open pocketbook for us to take money out. So yes, there's certain circumstances, dire need, in my opinion, to use that, but I don't want that to be a narrative where we're just dipping in there to cover this, because essentially when you put the whole package together, and that's what the budget committee will look at when it comes to the tax rate, that additional money that comes out of Article 10 reduces the tax rate, which has an impact on all the warrants where you'd put the $200,000 into the warrant, would reduce essentially the tax rate. To essentially just go from there to there, taking it out, doesn't make any sense. Unless it's a dire emergency where the board would have that discussion. I don't want it to be a formula for thought process. Does that make sense?
Sure does.
Thank you.
All right. Before we open to like, I don't know, responses to